good morning from New York and good afternoon in Israel. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Moriel Lotan, and I'm the founder and managing partner at Mile, which is a company where we team up with visionaries who are building the future of energy and dual-use technologies. This is the first webinar in our 2025 content series on energy security and dual-use technologies, a conversation that will lead up to our event during New York City Climate Week on September 26th, which will be focused on Israeli innovation and U.S. collaboration on energy security topics. More about that soon. You'll be able to find a pre-registration link on our website. When we talk about interoperability, which is a central topic of today's conversation, we usually talk about systems, technologies, and fundamentally machines. But as someone who's spent my career deeply engaged in human decision-making and human-to-human operations, I want to take a moment to talk about human interoperability, if you will, the ability of individuals, teams, and organizations to work together effectively. Now more than ever, human collaboration is critical. At the end of the day, as we often tell our clients who are looking to expand into the US energy and dual-use landscape, technology alone isn't enough. Success is built on human relationships, trust, and partnerships, especially in the complex and high-stakes domain of energy security and defense. That's why today is so significant. Not just because it's our first webinar in this series, but because it represents two exciting new partnerships. First, my new partner at Mile, Yair Niv, joins us formally today. With over 25 years of leadership in the Israeli Defense Forces, Yair has led innovative teams of analysts specializing in cyber, intelligence research for technological implementation. His role at Mile leverages this deep expertise, applying it to the private sector with a focus on energy and dual-use technologies. I'm proud to lead this next stage of Mile with him and grateful to call him both a friend and a partner. Secondly, I'd like to recognize the importance of our partnership with Ignite the Spark. Ignite isn't just an organization, it's a home for entrepreneurs, investors, scientists, and energy professionals who are dedicated to driving innovation in the Israeli energy sector. They've built a true ecosystem, bringing together visionaries and industry leaders to push the boundaries of what's possible in energy innovation. In an era where partnerships define progress, Ignite is a model of what collaboration should look like, and that is not something that we take for granted. We are really excited and honored to co-host today's discussion with Ignite the Spark and look forward to many more collaborations ahead. And with that, I'm really honored to turn it over to Sean Dana, the CEO of Ignite the Spark.
Thank you, Moriel. What a great opening for this webinar, for these sessions. Couldn't present it better. I'll try to be a little bit more flow and straightforward with that. When Moriel reached out, it was really like we're having great conversation, great discussion, great opportunity to work together. And as mentioned, we were more than happy and always looking forward for the collaboration and really appreciate the hard work behind the scenes, not only with Moriel, the rest of the team and Yariv, Eli, Sharon, and Neta, of course, that make and pulling all this organization and this event together into an event which might be one of the first, but not the last, of course, with a big conversation and a lot of interesting topics to delve in. But just a minute before, I'll quickly introduce a little more about Ignite the Spark and what we do for those that are less familiar. So Ignite the Spark is the energy tech ecosystem in Israel. It's a bootstrap community that arose from the need to develop the next energy tech entrepreneurs and venture nonprofit organization with a lot of verticals and pillars, starting from academia, industry, startup, women in energy, international aspects, as we all can see today. An ecosystem development that can be through those webinars and more activities that I'm happy to work and share with each one of you. One initiative that I do want to speak a little bit about, since we're speaking about energy security and as a topic, is a new initiative that Ignite is working toward the Build Back Better initiative, towards harness the vision of develop the next energy tech entrepreneurs and ventures, and also support the rehabilitation and rebuilding the damaged area in the south and potentially in the north as well in a better way. I'm happy to elaborate with who is relevant and was interesting to hear more afterwards and to share a little bit more of that. Yet we have a limited time today, and I want to go through with the hot topic and the discussion we have today. So the big headlines, and we see different narratives that are shaping energy security. What about climate change? What about sustainability, energy transition? We see, and the new narrative is come, drill baby drill, new policies, new tariffs, tax shifts are really like kind of seeing something different right now in the US ecosystem, but also in the global ecosystem, how all those global changes affecting each one of us, both the entrepreneurs, both and each one of us as individuals, geopolitical aspects, energy demands that rise, resilience that we see that the needs comes more and more, and technologies that get and penetrate into our life that create opportunities, but yet more challenges. So the bigger questions behind it, is it actually we are losing and we have something new, the narrative that has been changed? I think that's a deal with each one of us. And with these questions, I would help to address Muriel and help to maybe delve a little bit more into conversation. And we'll dive on that during these topics today. So Muriel, is it something that we're losing and is this narrative has been changed?
Thank you, Sean. It's a great question. My experience and what I'm seeing on the ground is that despite a lot of noise around leadership potentially not focusing on sustainability, or probably isn't focusing on sustainability, the big challenge is about the energy transition and energy security. Specifically, I think we are going to focus more as we move along and today on the opportunities and challenges for companies who are looking to participate in the US market. So I'd like to think about it more as an and than a versus, but I think that your question is totally spot on. The thing about interoperability is that it's not new, right? Like for decades, we've seen satellite interconnections, multi-purpose defense systems, different military operations that all require seamless integration across platforms. We see this from NATO to pan-European efforts. It's the backbone of industrial synergy, yet we are still all looking to understand how to achieve its full potential. The ability to exchange components across platforms and have total systems communicate with one another remain to be both a challenge and still in the midst of the chaos, I do think that there is an opportunity to understand. But let's bring this conversation for a minute into the commercial and energy sectors because it's not just about defense. It's about the ability of technology, capital, and regulatory frameworks to align in this increasingly interconnected global energy market. I ask myself a lot of the times, what's the challenge and the opportunity for foreign startups to penetrate the US market in this evolving landscape? And then, of course, for how foreign capital and even, I guess, domestic capital can find its way into those companies. The US energy sector is expanding. Companies across the globe are looking to position themselves strategically within it. And yet, there are key questions that come up quite often from investors. I think we're hearing a lot about which bets they should be taking right now, where to place that money, which teams and technologies have the highest potential, and how do they balance risk and opportunity in this evolving regulatory and geopolitical environment. In this landscape, as it's shifting more quickly than I think ever before, some things that we urge companies to understand is that you can't do this remotely. Entering the US market today, as opposed to potentially in other sectors, specifically around energy and dual use, you really have to have boots on the ground and local US presence that are deeply engaged with conversations and people. Partnerships are definitely going to be even more important than ever, whether it's through US joint ventures, strategic alliances, public and private collaborations. And at its core, this is a relationship-driven industry. Private capital isn't just looking for good technology, but looking for teams who have a vision and an understanding that these relationships are fundamental. We know that competition with China will dominate US policy, influencing everything from supply chains to investment decisions. Price and cost efficiency are going to be factors across all sectors, and domestic manufacturing, job creation, and efficiency will definitely be central to policy decision making. A word on energy security and national security. This is a US prioritization. It has to do a lot with energy dominance and other things that I just mentioned, but it's important to keep in mind. So, where are we today? And I get to be quiet and turn it over. Our goal isn't just to leave with answers, it's really to help inform asking the right questions. Over the next hour, a little less, we're going to hear from Brian Finch from Pillsbury, who will help us understand key insights into the evolving, constantly changing US regulatory landscape and what it means for companies in this space. And we'll also hear from the CEO of Argon Energy, who is working on cybersecurity solutions to protect energy assets and networks. But first, I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Ron Halpern. Ron is the Chief Commercial Officer at mPrest, a global leader in mission-critical command and control solutions. At mPrest, he drives innovation in distributed energy resource management and grid modernization, shaping the way energy systems evolve in this increasingly interconnected world. Ron, thank you for joining us. I want to start with this big question to tee up to you being able to inform us. As we just mentioned, interoperability isn't new, but it's become one of the most discussed topics across industries, I think from boardrooms to government agencies. But from your perspective, what does this word mean? Why does it matter so much right now? And as the Chief Commercial Officer, do you see it as a necessity within the energy and dual use sectors? And I guess finally, I'll just ask how you go about reconciling the opportunities and challenges that come with it. So thank you very much.
Great. So first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. So thank you, Mile Advisory, and thank you, Ignite the Spark. And obviously, good day to everyone, and thank you all for joining and participating. And definitely, before we start off our presentation, let's address that question. Interoperability, what it means, what is it as it pertains to energy, and why it matters. So just as far as interoperability in energy systems, so from our perspective, it's the seamless communication and integration of various technologies. And that's obvious, that's pretty straightforward. But I think it's important to define that it has to happen on multiple levels. So first level is a technical level. So there's a need for open communications and standards and shared data format, because without that, it doesn't matter if there's a standard, but if people aren't following the same data format, so there won't be too much interoperability. A second level that's important is on an operational level. In other words, we have multiple systems, and we'll soon understand why in the new energy future there are many more systems, but we got multiple systems working in unison, and we want them to work efficiently in unison rather than conflict with each other. So that's another aspect of interoperability from my perspective. And a third aspect is a regulatory and market aspect. Something that we're going to see in this presentation, though many of us know this already, is many of us energy consumers are becoming energy prosumers. In other words, we're also producers and also consumers. What we want to do is we want to have fair energy trading participation. In other words, we want to be able to trade based on a fairness algorithm, right? So based on a algorithm which would be acceptable and would define who wins that specific bid. And of course, it isn't only fairness in the market, but it's also regulatory. You have to comply with certain market requirements. So from that perspective, this is what interoperability is. Now, as far as why it's so important, especially in the new energy world, so if we take a look at the legacy energy world, the legacy energy world was always centralized systems, okay? And these systems lived in what's called a walled garden. So these were all controlled by the utility itself. And as a result, it was harder for hackers to hack in to the grid. However, when we're talking about the new distributed energy world, where we're talking about solar generation, wind generation, batteries. These could be grid scale batteries. These could be residential batteries, EVs, electric vehicles, electric vehicle chargers. All of this requires a much higher level of seamless integration. That's point number one. But also with this increased connectivity, especially of these assets, which are primarily sitting behind the meter. In other words, they're not owned by the utility, they're owned by you and by me. We're also having increased security risks. This nexus of energy and security, and I know security could be dealt with on two levels. One is the terminology energy security, which we'll talk about, but over here I'm talking about security from a cyber perspective. That will be a key theme of today's presentation. So I hope that addressed your question, Moriel. Maybe what I'll do now is just bring up my presentation. Okay, so mPrest as a company, we're not a startup. We were founded end of 2003, so that's about 21 years ago. And we've delivered hundreds of millions of dollars worth of mission critical software. When we started out in the defense software industry. And our flagship product is the command, control, analytics, AI, and orchestration software for the Iron Dome missile interception system. So I'm assuming all of us are quite familiar. And that's a highly successful, not only mission critical system, but life critical system. So it's literally changed geopolitical situations, not only in Israel, by the way, and it's protecting tens of millions of lives daily. Now, soon enough, what we realize is we don't have to focus just on the defense industry, because effectively what we have is a real-time distributed asset orchestration, AI and optimization IoT platform. And as a result of that, what we did is about 13 years ago, in 2012, we embarked upon an industrial IoT journey. These are some examples. We're obviously limited in time. I'm not going to get into these examples, but what we also decided is, and this was decided about 9 years ago, is we were looking for an area within the industrial IoT to focus on, and we'll talk about the reasons, but we're quite proud to have decided to be part of one of the most disruptive revolutions, which is the energy revolution. And it's driven by something called the 4 Ds, which is decarbonization, decentralization, digitization, and democratization of energy generation and consumption. Now, we built our platform based on our years of experience from the Iron Dome and from other systems, but 9 years ago, our focus became around managing and optimizing distributed energy resources. When we say distributed energy resources, or DERs, we're referring to PVs, photovoltaic cells, EVs, electric vehicles, storage, wind, etc. So various grid edge devices that have flexibility, that have energy that could contribute to the grid, and there's a need to manage them. That is what we do, and our main focus today is the Internet of Energy. Now, if we look at the energy sector, it's going through the biggest transformation we've seen in centuries. It's been quite a conservative sector till now. If we take a look at the current situation is that 80% of the world's energy still comes from fossil fuels. However, by 2030, there's going to be a $2.2 trillion investment in renewable energy globally. And the reason behind that massive investment is to invert the equation. So if today we're 80%, if we're 80% fossil fuel, we want to be 80% renewable. Obviously, 80% renewable is not the target for 2030. It's significantly lower. But what we want to be in a situation is that we're well on track towards that net zero carbon economy. By the way, spoiler, regretfully, we're not well on track, but that's a separate issue. And failure to adopt that will leave businesses and economies behind. Now, question is, why bother with that transition at all? So why move from fossil fuels? And that's also feeding into one of Moriel's comments before. So if we take a look at the reasons could be just subdivided into 3 groups. One is climate goals. So countries and economies have committed to climate goals with various milestones. Main milestone is by 2030 to half emissions by 2030, carbon emissions by 2030. Another one is energy security, and this is the general energy security, not talking about cybersecurity. And there's a need to reduce a dependency on imports. We see the situation in Europe over the past few years where countries like Germany are highly dependent upon importing gas and energy, and as a result, energy prices skyrocketed. On the other hand, Israel, even though Israel is an island, an energy island, it's considered not to have an energy issue. In other words, we have full energy security to the extent that we're exporting energy and our prices are considered low. But either way, renewable energy is going to assist in energy security simply because A, we're adding more assets, more sources of energy flexibility, and B, if anything happens to the grid because of the distributed nature, as a result, even if something happened to one asset, the other asset is going to continue operating. And the final group would be sustainable development, where clean energy supports both economic growth as well as healthier communities. Now, supposedly this is something that could have happened already. Why is it only in process? Why didn't it happen years ago? And the reason is, first of all, because a lot of technological innovation is happening. So if we take a look at solar, we take a look at wind, we take a look at storage, we take a look at EVs, where the main component in an electrical vehicle from a cost perspective is the storage itself. All of these had significant technological innovation, which reduced costs significantly and made it a viable solution. In addition, there's policy and global cooperation. So we have the Paris Agreement targets that we talked about, and we also have, as a result of that, various national decarbonization policies, investments. And finally, there's consumer demand. So I and you and all of us collectively, or many of us collectively, may demand today more clean energy options. So as a result of all of that, those are the drivers that are making that energy transition happen today. So question is, where do we, mPrest, fit in? And we fit in on several levels. So if we just take a look at the trends that are happening, so more distributed energy resources, more DERs are being connected to the grid itself. And this, on the one hand, is bringing a lot of good things that we're talking about. On the other hand, also bringing challenge, which we'll talk about. But the point is, if you take a look at this graph, and by the way, you can imagine this is called the duck curve, and you see the duck drawn in the middle. Essentially, this is specifically for California, but it could be for anywhere. So the graph, once upon a time, in 2000 or 2005, was a much flatter curve. It was never 100% flat. There was always more demand in the morning, during the day, and at night than there was in the middle of the night, but it was much more flatter. And as a result, the utilities and the energy market was able to match supply and demand much easily. But as we see this is just examples, between 2019 and 2021, what we're seeing are two things. Number one, the belly of the duck. In other words, at peak solar generation times at 1 p.m., we're seeing that the curve is dipping more and more. This does not mean that the demand is going down. It means that the demand, as the utility sees it, is going down. The demand is actually going up, but there's more solar generation installed behind the meter, which is meeting. This in itself is causing major issues to the market and major issues to the generators, because suddenly the generators have to generate less than they were generating in the past, and you can't just shut down a generation plant, because when you're going to want to fire it up again, it's going to cost much more. It's worthwhile to keep it running idle than to shut it down. So as a result, at the peak of the generation, the solar generation day, so midday, they will actually give you money in order to buy energy. Whereas at the peak of the demand at night, the prices are going to skyrocket. So what we're seeing is prices are going from negative to 1,000x from the average price. And what we're doing, our platform, our DERMS platform, Distributed Energy Resource Management System platform, software platform is doing, is it's enabling utilities to manage these instabilities and manage the supply and demand and the grid stability. That is our main target. Now, as we mentioned before, each one of us as individuals could be prosumers. So we could actually produce with our solar, we could store with our battery, and we could sell to the grid. When many of us come together in a single group in order to have more capacity, more generation, we're called a virtual power plant or a VPP. Now, such a system or such a company, a VPP, an entity, would also require a DERM system. They'll require it with different target functions, so they're going to use it differently, but they'll still be using it. So what we're doing is we're assisting utilities and VPPs to optimize, in a utility case, to optimize their grid stability, in a VPP case, to optimize their trading with the market so that could be most profitable. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a second type of security, and this is on the challenge side, and this is cybersecurity. So if we take a look at the legacy utility architecture, it was very centralized and very, as we said before, walled garden. So there was little access from the outside world to the assets, and as a result, the threats were mitigated. But now that we have many more assets, and most of these many more assets are actually behind the meter. In other words, you and I own them. They're not owned by the utility. So as a result, it's no longer a walled garden. Any hacker can access these assets, and these assets are contributing to the grid. So there's increased cyber threats. And this is driving the second point, which is grid stability. So as a result of these increased cyber threats, there's instability or potential instability to the grid. Obviously, there's data privacy issues. And as a result of all that, the regulator is defining various regulation and compliance rules, which not only the utility, the VPP, and even the prosumers have to meet. I think the good news is that as far as solving these challenges, it's not a major issue. It's more a state of mind, because these cyber challenges are challenges that many private enterprises have day in, day out, and they simply have a certain security mindset, a security methodology, which they follow. And what we're seeing utilities do is that they're starting to do that, adopt that state of mind and adopt those policies and follow. So the good news is, yes, there are challenges, and these are cyber challenges, so there are issues, but there are definitely ways to mitigate them, and these are not unthought of ways that they have to be invented. It's just a matter of going out and doing it.
Is there something specific that you want us to take away in our thinking? And then we're going to move it right over to Sean.
Yeah, okay. So looking forward and just touching partially on what you said, these deals are long-term strategic deals. They're relationship deals. They're marathon runner deals, not sprint runner deals. As far as the future of energy, it's looking bright, and it's going to be very dependent upon the adoption of distributed energy. So we heard about microgrids, VPPs, DERs. That is how, A, there's going to be sufficient generation in the grid, and B, how there's also going to be energy security, because the grid is going to be distributed. So even if one part goes down, the other part is still up. So looking forward to a new energy future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron. It was fascinating, and to hear about the new journey of mPrest for the last few years, and also what is holding for the future of energy transition towards the few layers. And you spoke a little bit about go-to-market. Maybe we have a time with the Q&A session to hear more about that. All the audience, just share a little bit questions you have. I know it's a big topic, so we can address that at the end of this webinar. So just like to recap and go forward to our next speaker, David Rothenberg, which is, I'm proud to say, it's an alumni of the Ignite 2 program. and today leading in argon energy, emerging startup tackling one of the most critical challenges of grid modernization and also energy transition, which is cyber. If we're speaking about security, this is probably one of the main elements we should focus about. Without further ado, I think I'll let David take it from here and share a sneak peek into his solution and what he do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me. I'm David. I've been with the Israeli tech industry for about two decades now, working around the R&D, cybersecurity, and regulatory compliance of systems that involve both hardware and software components. And I founded Argon Energy because of the huge change that the energy industry is going through, and I think Ron described it beautifully. Eventually, everything is becoming digital, everything is connected, distributed, the grid is smart, which is great, and it makes our lives easier on one hand. But on the other hand, there are a few problems that are not addressed enough, I think. The first being that once the grid became smart, it also became a target for cybersecurity attacks. And it's a big issue, obviously. And I think that there are not enough tools today that are dedicated specifically for the needs and the threats of smart grids. Point number two is that the regulatory authorities are also changing their mind. We can see processes both in the US and in Europe where the regulation becomes mandatory. It was kind of a recommendation, but it becomes mandatory, which places grid operators and energy providers in a place where they are supposed and they're expected to defend their grids from cyber attacks. They're supposed to comply to different regulatory requirements, and they often lack the workforce that can help them do that. So I mentioned earlier that there are not enough tools out there dedicated for smart grid security, but also the existing tools are often very technical. They're meant to be used by cybersecurity professionals, by cybersecurity teams that monitor them 24/7. But the problem is that many grid operators don't actually have 24/7 cybersecurity experts on their side. Therefore, they find themselves in a position when they're expected to deal with those issues without any tools. This is where Argon Energy was born, and we provide a software platform that is installed on premises on the grid network of the grid operator. It's not installed in the cloud. All the data is being kept on the network of the grid operator. The software platform provides full cybersecurity dedicated and tailored to the needs of the grid operator. It also analyzes.
Just, I'm not sure if you should maybe presenting more. I don't know if you missed that, like presenting the slides in the background when you're moving on.
I have actually an example of a feature that we have, but maybe I'll just finish my
Cool.
describing the platform, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions. So as I mentioned, we provide full cybersecurity protection dedicated for smart grid operators. And furthermore, we analyze all the inputs that we get from their network and the events that are happening in the network. We can analyze any inputs from the company itself, whether documents or anything else, and we automatically compare it to the regulatory requirements relevant for that specific company and their region, providing very clear and simple gap analysis, helping them not only to keep the grid safe, but also comply with the regulatory compliance. Our software is based on state-of-the-art AI models, and everything is wrapped up in a very user-friendly and easy-to-use user interface so that it can be used by cybersecurity professionals, but it also can be used by people who have little or no technical experience with cybersecurity. And the software will help them and instruct them all the way from closing the gap to eventually complying with the regulatory requirements. I will show you one small feature one small example of what our software does. You can see my screen, right? Yeah. So the software would automatically scan the grid, scan all the assets, detect any anomalies, detect any open vulnerabilities or anything else that can potentially harm the grid. And I just want to show you an example of just a random vulnerability. I'm sure that all of you are aware that the vulnerabilities are being recorded by kind of a worldwide standard. And this is an example of a vulnerability. This is just a unique ID number. And if you look it online, this is what you will find in the official NIST database. So NIST provides an official database for vulnerabilities, and we can just see what they say. So they say that this is affected TrueTech P2P products SDK using versions before 3.1.5, etc., etc. It's a bunch of gibberish. Even a cybersecurity professional would find that difficult to understand. And of course, when we're talking about a small or medium grid operator with a small IT team, and they're expected to manage their vulnerabilities and address them, I think that this is impossible in practice. If we look at the same vulnerability that would be automatically detected by our platform, I will zoom in a little bit. It will have a very short and user-friendly description, just describing what the vulnerability is and what they should do in order to mitigate this vulnerability. The software will, of course, not only instruct the user, but also make sure that the mitigation was done properly. They could have a more detailed description, still much easier to read than the thing that we see right here. So again, this is just one small feature of our platform. Eventually, we provide both cybersecurity and regulatory compliance, making it very easy even for non-technical users.
Thank you so much, David. Hoping to get to more information in our Q&A, but everyone's obviously going to be able to reach out to you and learn more after the webinar. So we heard from a company, mPrest, and now we heard from a startup, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Brian, who's a public policy partner at Pillsbury with extensive experience in regulatory and government affairs and advocacy. You can read much more about him, but it's been a pleasure getting to know Brian recently. He's a truly recognized authority on global security and cybersecurity threats. Brian provides legal counsel to companies across industries on regulatory issues, cyber attacks, national defense policies, and homeland security. So, Brian, so happy to have you join us. And now I think let's just jump right into, I guess, my first question to you, which is this regulation versus reality question, which is really about your experience advising U.S. utilities and private sector clients, many of the clients that both startups and companies are looking to target. And how do you balance between the need for strong cybersecurity investment with avoiding, I guess, overregulation that might not always yield meaningful security improvements? And if I might just add, because I know that you were a part of the first Trump transition team for Homeland Security, how is this approach changing, I guess, across administrations, and what do you see coming?
Yeah, thanks, Marielle. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this and join a really rather impressive roster of speakers. I'll address the second part of your question first, which is what's happening with the new administration. I will tell you, it is a very stark difference from what has happened over the last 4 years in the United States. Over the last 4 years, there was extremely strong interest in heavily regulating and having prescriptive regulations for the energy industry, both gas and electricity, as well as water, and many other components of the American industry. And the previous administration was one that firmly believed that government needed to tell people what to do. They would play at the margins of exactly how companies could comply with that, but a lot of the security solutions were dictated to them. And that was in part because when the Biden administration came in, it was on the heels of SolarWinds and some of the other really significant hacks inside the United States. There was the Colonial Pipeline incident in early 2021, and that's the worst results for companies because what happened there is that there was a significant hack. It affected prices, one of the most visible prices in the world, gas prices. They shot up on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And as a result, the White House, the Biden administration responded with, I think it's fair to say a heavy-handed regulation in form of a TSA, Transportation Security Administration Security Directive. And for those of you who don't know, a quirk of statute is that the TSA, the people in blue shirts who screen your luggage and pat you down, actually also regulate pipelines and surface transportation in the United States. So they issued the security directive, which directed all pipeline owners to implement rather significant, costly cybersecurity measures. And this was put together in about 2.5 months. It came out, it was expensive, it was lengthy, it was unclear how it was going to work, but it was dictated largely by TSA. As time went on, it became more of a risk-oriented regulation. And so there was more feedback from the community, but at the end of the day, it was still the government telling companies how to conduct cybersecurity, what threats they needed to worry about, what compliance needed to look like, and there was inspections, reviews, appeals, etc. This administration is very different. I know a lot of the folks from my past transition experience and friends in the industry who are now leading up cybersecurity at DHS, at other cabinet agencies as well. And they are clearly on a mission to say industry knows best. We're going to defer to them. And we're also going to take a position that regulation is not a good thing and that it doesn't really help cyber. As I mentioned to you, Marielle, I was actually at the president's speech last night, and one of the big applause lines he got was that, for every one regulation we issue, we're cutting 10. Now, I don't think that they're going to cut cybersecurity regulations, but they're certainly not in a mood in this administration to tell industry what to do. And, one of the greatest examples is I mentioned water cybersecurity. I actually represent a number of water utility organizations. It is no longer a situation where the White House is looking to dictate water cybersecurity. It's looking to industry and looking to the private sector to say, how should we do this? To the extent they're even paying attention to it, honestly. And so it is going to be more of a collaboration, which is a good opportunity because more innovative solutions can come forward. There's still a lot of extraordinarily smart professionals. And I think this gets lost in the news. The people I know who are working in cybersecurity in the new administration, very smart, very sharp, aware of the threats, take them seriously, but don't agree that a bureaucrat in Washington is the one who has all the answers. In fact, they think a lot of the time they aren't flexible enough, they aren't agile enough to actually respond to the cyber threats. And they also realize too, what Ron and others have been talking about is that, the threats are everywhere. At this point, when you look at the threats, everything is a threat. Every purchase is a threat. Even cybersecurity products are a threat, right? I won't mention the company's name, but we all know about the security company who issued an update and managed to delay flights and cause all sorts of other problems. And that wasn't a cyber attack, but the end result was the same as if it were a cyber attack. And it could have been the result of a cyber attack in the sense of, the disruption easily could have been malicious, even though, again, to be clear, it was not malicious. But that just goes to show that these cyber threats are everywhere. And companies need solutions to all these cyber threats because even though government isn't stepping in, now particularly public companies, which is your average utility, they have to disclose what their cyber threats are and what measures they're taking. And if they misrepresent in any way, shape, or form what those cyber threats are, what their capabilities are, they're subject to lawsuit both by the government and the private sector. And trust me, as a lawyer, if there's one thing I know is that there's a lot of my colleagues out there who are more than happy to sue on anything. But you can go ahead and do it, and it's going to cost a lot of money both for you and for the people you're suing. So that's something you really need to care about and think about. And when we talk about this notion of interoperability, dual use, et cetera, the cyber market in the energy industry, regardless of what we're talking about, fossil fuels, nuclear, renewable, behind the meter, in front of the meter, however you want to call it, all of that needs to have a cybersecurity component. It's a question that will be asked by procurement teams, by legal, by risk officers. And if you don't have a good answer for it, you're going to be disfavored from a procurement perspective. So you really need to focus on that.
I think on that note, because you just mentioned about having a good answer for it, and maybe we could just shift for a second to talk about market entry specifically for foreign startups, Israeli, European, it doesn't matter. the defense and intelligence communities have mixed views, I guess, for a moderate way of putting it, on Israeli companies. Nonetheless, what are the key challenges that you see for Israeli and foreign cybersecurity and other startups and companies that have these dual use applications in securing US contracts? And I'll just add, especially as we're seeing more DoD, Department of Defense contracts around energy come around, and how can these companies overcome these obstacles, if at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, in some components of the U.S. government, there's a little bit of skepticism about Israeli-generated products. Also, to be clear, I'm Jewish. You can see my lapel pin. Finch isn't the most Jewish name. It was Finch. Long discussion about when it was changed. But so I'm not happy about that bias in the intelligence community for any number of reasons. It does exist, but it can be overcome. And I would say that at the same time, there is a lot of acceptance and excitement to use Israeli companies in the private sector, especially for compliance purposes. And you mentioned the energy sector for government contractors. It's the Defense Department has to, contractors and subcontractors have to meet certain cybersecurity thresholds. It's a program called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. There's no ban in there whatsoever on Israeli products. And theoretically, there's no ban on Chinese products either, but most people are smart enough to know not to use Chinese cybersecurity products. But when we talk to decision makers, to security officers, to risk officers, et cetera, they sort of, if there's something that's Israeli made, they say, oh yeah, well, it's former 8,200 engineers who are working on this, and there's a little bit of credibility, a good amount of credibility that's associated with that. So I think, the challenge from an entry point perspective is just making sure that you're speaking the language of the people who are going to be buying your products. And by that, I mean, they get bombarded with compliance solutions every day. It's to the point where they don't even take sometimes even demonstrations or sales calls, et cetera. You need to have partners who know how to work that industry, have good relationships, and you need to have a solution that meets the requirements that these companies are facing, that they can pay for it. And in the energy industry in particular, if you're dealing with regulated utilities, it's something that's an allowable cost and is, they'll get rate reimbursement from their local public utilities, et cetera. You really want to focus on that and making sure you have the argument to say that, look, I'm not selling you a science project. This isn't for a future hypothetical threat. This is a threat you need to meet now. If you fail to meet it, not only is there going to be a disruption, but you're going to face potential backlash and potential penalties or litigation associated with failing to have met that threat. Speak that language and then be able to come in and talk about how you can slip right in and nobody's going to question your purchase, and you'll be on your way to successfully entering the U.S. market.
Thank you. And finally, we could talk so much more, and I know people will have a chance to meet you in person, hopefully on September 26th. But I did start out by mentioning the human to human factor. And we do know very well that trust and building trust, whether it's within the US government or in the private sector, is critical. Boots on the ground are critical. As far as strategic partnerships are concerned, what are some of the best practices that you've seen or successful examples of foreign companies being able to, navigate this tension?
Yeah, it's a great question. So certainly, as mentioned before, having a U.S. presence, having Americans as part of your company, you can even be dual citizens. We've worked with plenty of folks who are both American and Israeli citizens. That's important just because of the constant presence inside the United States. If there's issues with customer service or quality management, having people domestically is really important on that front, but also understanding who are the real decision makers and who are sort of the key players within the United States, and particularly in the energy industry. Again, whether you're talking about electricity, natural gas, oil, nuclear, renewable, there are trade associations, and those trade associations have cybersecurity experts. You really want to be able to have connectivity to them. You want to be part of their advisory groups and know them, because when those cybersecurity experts speak and they endorse someone or they invite you to present at one of their conferences, it's a real seal of endorsement that this is a company that is trusted, that is one that the industry thinks offers a good solution. So I think, and again, that's part of the presence in the United States, is building those relationships with those individuals. And it's a relatively small group, but once you're on the inside, it's exceptionally helpful. I can't say that it's absolutely going to lead to sales, but you're going to be in a much, much better position than if you were just trying to individually walk up to the Chief Information Security Officer of United States Power to make up a fictional company
Perfect.
or something like that.
Thank you so much, Brian. I think we're going to move over to some questions from the audience with the 8 minutes. So, Sean, maybe you want to kick it off, and you've been reading the questions that have been coming in.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Muriel. And just a moment before we need to wrap up, and also before the questions we got from the audience, maybe one question is both of you, Ron and David. Maybe Ron, you can start since I know we have a limited time. And you both spoke pretty briefly that I think that's one of the most interesting topic is about kind of go-to-market and clients, either how to approach of them and long-term relationships, how it's essential to go with those kind of clients. And David, you spoke about the team managing challenges and not necessarily have a big team that dealing with those efforts. Maybe can you share a bit from each one a perspective about this area, how to penetrate, how it's work, how the process looks like? Everyone can
Sure.
start.
Sure, gladly. So thanks for the question. And I agree vehemently with Brian's analysis on his contribution to that question. At least what we've seen is that there could be situations where you'd have a resistance, not so much to an Israeli company, but to a foreign company. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't certain sectors or certain geographies where it's also to an Israeli, but I'm saying in general, what we're seeing is that the resistance could be to a foreign company in certain areas, and cyber is definitely one of them, and general security is another area. I could just quote several CIOs and CTOs who told us specifically, hell, if you could do the Iron Dome, you could do our system. So the reason I'm saying it is not so much for the Iron Dome, it's for Israeli companies not to worry. If you're in a field where you have a relative advantage, then I don't think that in the US, definitely not as a whole, maybe in a specific sector, but in the US, definitely not in the energy sector, you're not going to be labeled Israeli and persona non grata. So that was just the point I wanted to make from our personal experience. That being said, in Malaysia, the customer told us informally, wow, we love it, but we want to be honest, we don't see how it's going to happen. So it really depends on the geography as well. But going to the core question, as far as go to market, as I started saying, this is a different kind of sale. It's a critical infrastructure, long sales cycle, formal sale. These are bids, these are RFPs, requests for proposals. And no one is going to buy you just because you're the best price. And no one's going to buy you because you're the best technology, or as Brian said, you've got a lab demonstration, right? They're going to buy you, needless to say, yes, you have to be competitive in pricing and you have to have the right solution. As Brian said, know your customer. So you have to also know who you're selling to and have to understand that entire sales cycle. You want to sell to the right individual at the right time, because if you're going to focus on the right individual but at the wrong time, it's not going to help you at all. So you want to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, what these customers, what we're seeing that these customers are looking for is holistically to mitigate their risk. So you could have a great product, but if it's at risk to be delivered, it doesn't help. So they're going to select the solution, the product and the solution around it that mitigates their risk to have success. And in large organizations, people do not only want organizational success, they want personal success. They want to be promoted within the organization as a result of that. Cannot have relationships at all the right customers. And therefore, going back to what Brian said, there's definitely a need for feet on the ground, okay, feet on the street. That's number one. Number two, in order to scale, it makes no sense to scale just internally, direct sales. So there's a need for indirect sales. There's a need for partnerships. And by the way, these partnerships could take two forms. It could be another technology company that has those access and you complete each other. It could be a systems integrator who has that access, those relationships, and you complete each other. But it could also be a specific individual who has specific access to a specific customer or to two customers. You don't have to look for someone who could get you into 37 customers. Once again, if you take a look at investor-owned utilities, there are about 100 of them, 150 of them in the US. So you'll find X, and of those 150, maybe you're targeting 35 of them. you'll find 5 people who could get you to 20 of them, and you're in an amazing situation. Okay?
Thank
So
you, Ron.
it's based on all that.
Yeah, then David, going back to your side, as you mentioned, how you kind of facing the challenge of when you don't have a big team of IT that can deal with those challenges and not necessarily have the expertise work with that, how do you bridge the gap? Who would explain what the solution is?
You're asking David, right?
Yeah, David.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's a great question. And actually, I will just continue what Ron said. I think that you really need to understand the customer's need and the customer's pain, because you can have the best technology and the best algorithm, but if your product is too complicated or too difficult or even impossible for them to use, they won't take it. So I think that we need to make use of the technological advancements out there, for example, AI, that can really do a lot of the heavy lifting and simplify the products for many customers that don't have, like you said, 20 IT professionals working for them.
Thank you. Maybe just like because we have limited time and we have questions from the chat, Leah asked about how can smart grid cybersecurity solution protect critical infrastructure while still allowing operators to maintain real-time control of the system, being basically able to maintain their routine during those kind of efforts. Brian, David, feel free to answer whoever feel comfortable.
Yeah. Sorry, one second. I just want to add to that question. Brian, it would be great to start, if you can, with you, because I think that there's a really big question that keeps coming up about operators and being able to maintain that real-time control, as technology also advances on the one hand, but, human operators are who they are.
Yeah, I would say that you really need to focus on integration and, as mentioned earlier, artificial intelligence solutions. These organizations are big, but they're not unlimited in budget, and they're so massive that they have any number of issues that they're dealing with at any given moment. And I think one of the most critical things, and again, our friends at the unnamed cybersecurity company that starts with CS, that was a really good example of breaking things is really bad if you're trying to increase efficiency or cybersecurity. And inserting additional complexity into an already complex environment is really challenging and is something that is just extremely disfavored. In part because if you've heard it once, you've heard it a million times. When you issuing a patch isn't as simple as updating your iPhone, right, in an hour or two. Issuing a patch and doing a fix in critical infrastructure can take upwards of 9 months. And so you really need to make sure that if your solution is engineered for these environments, that it is going to work, or that if it is going to potentially cause a problem, you are not going to be creating a massive problem. And obviously the unknown unknowns are, unknowable, to quote Rumsfeld. But at the same time, there's no quicker way to find yourself with low sales than to introduce something that is very complex and can introduce a tremendous amount of uncertainty as to how it will impact an unbelievably complicated system like the grid.
Thank you. David and Brian, I think you guys should definitely have an offline conversation. There's probably a lot for you guys to talk about. We are going to wrap up. It's already a little over time, but before I do, I just wanted to say a few things. Besides thanking everyone, I wanted to just turn it over for a minute to Sean, thanking you, of course, personally, and just sharing with us anything exciting that you guys have coming up at Ignite.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. Thank you for everybody. For those that are less familiar, we're having very upcoming Energy Tech Week in June, which has a lot of opportunities around, both for startups and both for the whole ecosystem stakeholders. So you can take a photo or scan these 2 barcodes, either your startups or either just want to learn more about that. And would be happy to see you around and get you involved with this exciting week ahead.
And it's not too hot yet. It's not too hot yet in Israel if you want to go in June. I know more people are starting to head back over to Israel, which we're really excited about. On our end at Mile, I just wanted to thank everyone again. As I mentioned, this is the first webinar in a series of content that we're doing for 2025 focused on energy security and dual use. Our new website is up today. You can check that out as well, www.mile.earth. Most importantly, thanking my team behind the scenes for making this happen, Sharon, Eli, and everyone at Ignite. And we look forward to being in touch, to hearing more from you soon. Our QR code will lead you to put your information to receive energy and dual use tech insights from us at our intelligence desk. And we look forward to getting to work together. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and see you next time.